Hello, Why Religion friends. John Hilton here. Today we're releasing a special bonus episode to tell you about a very exciting project. And I'm joined today by one of our very own Why Religion podcast hosts, Casey Griffiths. Casey, welcome.
Hi, John. Good to be here.
Casey, you've been working with Anthony Sweat, the former Why Religion podcast host, on a special series called Why Religion Presents. Normally in a Why Religion episode, we interview a professor about a specific research study that they've done, and twice a month on the 1st and the 15th of the month, these episodes are released. But there's not really a connection between each episode.
Yeah.
With Why Religion Presents, there's going to be a theme for the next 11 weeks.
Yeah, this is our first attempt at what's called long-form podcasting, which is, I've been involved in Why Religion from the beginning, but each episode is kind of a self-contained study. We're talking with brother or sister so-and-so about their study on this, and that is the episode. And I love that format. Actually, it's super appealing to me because when I want to catch up on someone's research, I jump in and I listen to an episode. At the same time, one of the things that's developed over the last few years in podcasting is long-form podcasts where you take multiple episodes and tackle a different subject. For instance, one of the earliest blockbusters in this area was called Serial. It was produced by This American Life, and it was basically a story of a murder investigation that instead of being dealt with in one episode was dealt with over about 13 different episodes. And so we wanted to take the podcast format a little bit and say, well, what if we picked one topic, we brought in a bunch of different people to talk about it, and we looked at it from a number of different angles. And that's where gospel teaching, which is our first venture into this format, really comes from.
So this is kind of like your Church History Matters podcast for people who don't know. And if you do not know, you definitely want to hop on and check out Casey Griffiths and Scott Woodward's podcast, Church History Matters. You take really important topics like Joseph Smith's polygamy or race in the priesthood, and you don't just try to cover it in 30 minutes. You'll do several episodes doing a deep dive.
Yeah. And that, by the way, thank you for mentioning my other podcast.
Hey, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan.
I'm a gratuitous promoter of that. We realized when we were putting together Church History Matters that a topic like Book of Mormon translation or race in the priesthood probably couldn't be handled in just one episode and do it thoroughly and correctly. And so we started doing series where we started out with 5 or 6 episodes to cover something like Book of Mormon translation. And then it turned into something where we really felt free to dive in as deep as we wanted to. We did a series on succession in the presidency. And we wound up doing, I think, 15 episodes on that because we started to get into all the different churches that have broken off and gone their own direction and bringing in people to talk about them. And it was just a really, really fun format where you don't feel as much pressure to get through everything in 45 minutes, though hopefully each episode in gospel teaching is something that you can revisit if you want to, as many times as you feel the need to.
So in this case, with the specific topic of gospel teaching, maybe tell us a little bit about how is it that this became the first Why Religion Presents series?
Yeah, its origins are fairly simple. A year or two ago, I was made a teaching fellow. There's an Ephraim Hatch Fellowship here at BYU that just asks you to improve teaching. And I was working with some of our part-time teachers who are absolutely wonderful, and many of whom go on to become full-time teachers here at BYU. And the thing is they're a disparate group. It's hard to get them all together into one place because they're busy, gifted people that are often doing different things. So how to get them together and give them training and support that will help them understand and gain new skills on how to teach in the classroom was really difficult. One of the things that we realized, though, was that if we could bring the training to them and meet them on their own terms, it might be a little bit easier. And one of the advantages of a podcast is that you can listen to it while you're mowing the lawn or doing dishes or driving to work in your car, and you don't have to show up in a specific time and place. So the idea behind this podcast was to provide 11 episodes of the most important skills when it comes to gospel teaching, with us listening to some of the leading experts in each one of these areas, just explaining their craft and talking a little bit about how they've developed their teaching style.
Wow, this is so exciting. Now, just to be clear, this is for all teachers. You might be a primary teacher, Sunday school teacher, seminary, Relief Society, young men's, young women's, wherever you are, this is for you. If you're a person teaching in any capacity at home or at church, you are going to benefit from these episodes.
Yeah, that's kind of the tagline for the series is we start each episode by saying everyone in the church is a teacher. And so it's not just focused on people that teach college level classes like you and I do. We interviewed Susan Porter, who's the church's general primary president. She talked a lot about teaching children. We interviewed Brad Wilcox and Emily Bell Freeman, who both worked in the young women's and young men's organizations and are talking about how to teach youth. We interviewed all kinds of different teachers and hopefully found universally applied skills that anybody can take advantage of. So we're hoping that somebody who's teaching primary would listen to this and come away with something that's going to be useful that they can use this Sunday. And someone that's teaching institute can listen to this and take away something that's useful that they're going to use in their institute class tonight. It's as universal as we could possibly make it.
This sounds fantastic. Now, I came across a quote as I was preparing for our conversation today. It's from President Dallin H. and he's talking directly to teachers. He says, "Your task is holy, and your performance is therefore the subject of high expectations. Your teachings are potentially the most important your students will ever receive. All of us who have been called or appointed as teachers of religion have the sobering and sacred responsibility of trying to make ourselves and our performance worthy of the great message we bear." So how do you think this series is going to help people who want to be better teachers? My experience is everyone wants to be a great teacher, but a lot of us are nervous, or like you said, maybe we don't have the time, the resources, the skills. How's this going to help?
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to emphasize in this series is, first of all, statements like that quote from President Oaks put a lot of pressure on you, right? This is literally the most important thing you could ever be teaching. At the same time, too, there's a lot of discussion, especially among educators, over whether or not teaching is an art or a science. One thing that we deal with, for instance, is you wouldn't walk up to a Picasso and say, well, this doesn't look very much like a Van Gogh, right? The truth is they're meant to be different from each other. And they both have unique and individual styles. And sometimes the discourse is, well, is good teaching going to look the same from one teacher to another? At the same time, in any field, whether you're a Picasso or a Van Gogh, you can sharpen your skills. And you can learn by watching and listening to other people who have dedicated their lives to that art. And so that we didn't get too pushed into one format or say, this is the ideal teacher, this is the person that you should exactly teach like, which I just don't believe is the case. The only ideal teacher in my mind is Jesus Christ. But when I watch Brad Wilcox teach, or Hank Smith, or Gay Strathern, they're doing something totally different. And so instead of an episode where we just interview one person and pick apart their style, each episode consists of 2 interviews intercut. And you might be hearing different things from each teacher, and they're just explaining, here's my process, here's how this works. So in one of our episodes, for instance, we sat down with Janet Erickson, who is an incredibly gifted teacher, and Brian Mead, who is also a very gifted teacher, but who have very different styles. And their topic was, how do you handle sensitive questions? They both did a masterful job, and they both shared principles that I think are universally applicable, but they also felt free to say, well, this is how I do it. And Janet Erickson handling a challenging question is probably going to look a little bit different than Brian Mead does. But for all of us, when we see good teaching, we learn from it. I think, John, you and I can both admit that there are elements of all of our good teachers in our style. There's material, there's techniques that we've stolen from people that are really, really gifted that we just kind of incorporated into our own style. And we're hoping people get a chance to do that. At the same time, also learn some of these widely applicable principles of teaching that anybody can sharpen and get a little bit better at.
So tell us, you mentioned a few names and topics. Tell us a little bit more. What other people can we expect to be learning from, and topics we be speaking about?
Well, we lined up a group of really gifted teachers. And I will say my biggest regret is we couldn't get all the teachers in this that we wanted. There are gifted teachers here at BYU who I would love to do another series with. There's some teachers in seminary and institute. There's even some teachers in my ward that I'm saying, wow, this person has it figured out. I wish I could have brought him or her. in to speak about this. But because it's a limited series, and we really wanted a person to be able to listen to the 11 episodes and feel like they've been through some kind of training course, we decided to immediately limit it. So I gave the leadership here at BYU a list of the teachers I was thinking about. They contributed. We all collaborated together. A lot of times it was based on their availability. And then the dean here at BYU, Scott Espelin, actually challenged us to broaden even further. And so some people that are so busy, we never would have thought about bringing them on. We took the time to schedule. So the first episode is Clark Gilbert, who's the Church Commissioner of Education, talking about big picture education in the church on every level, from Sunday school that happens every week to higher education happening at church universities around the globe. The other guest on that episode is Chad Webb, who's the head of seminaries and institutes and has been for over a decade now, talking about his experiences teaching. This is a person who travels the world and sees teaching every single day. And we're able to sit down with him and say, what do you see that really makes a difference in the lives of the students? I mean, one day he might be watching a teacher in Tonga in a church elementary or secondary school, and the next day he's watching an early morning teacher in Maine. What do you see that's universal among them? We also tried to bring in diverse voices and different people. For instance, Barbara Gardner is a very gifted teacher who's here at BYU. Her specialty is teachings of the living prophets. And she's paired in an episode with Matt Richards, who literally has given an address in General Conference before. Matt served in the General Sunday School presidency and spoke on several occasions in General Conference. And we had the two of them break down, well, what do you do when your teaching assignment is a talk? And how do you take that talk and turn it into a lesson that's applicable, and you're doing something with the content of the talk and not just reading the talk again? Because anybody can read the talk, right? But it takes a teacher to say, okay, let's break down this talk. Let's pull out the most important principles. And then let's come up with some ways that we can generate discussion and application among our students.
This whole series sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So tell us about the timeline. When will these episodes be released? How is this going to happen?
So the timeline is going to be a little bit different, where they're all going to be released over the summer, one per week, starting with episode 1, which is that episode with Clark Gilbert and Chad Webb, and leading all the way through a number of topics. So we have Brad Wilcox and Emily Freeman talking about knowing your audience, how to adjust a gospel message based on who you're going to speak to. You're going to use a different toolbox when you're talking to teenage youth than when you're talking to Melchizedek priests and adults or anything like that. As the series goes on, we've got topics like teaching by the Spirit, which Hank Smith and Ryan Sharp are helping us with. How to teach with the scriptures, which two incredibly gifted teachers, Joe Spencer and Gay Strathern, are helping us with. And on down to some really specific topics, like I mentioned before, handling sensitive questions, which sometimes happens. And we brought in Phil Allred and Cammie Anderson to talk about one-on-one teaching. So one of the things that we wanted to give people training to is to understand that most teachers have a classroom. And sometimes that classroom can include hundreds of people, and sometimes that classroom is one person that you're sitting there and teaching. Could be a son or daughter. It could be a student who's come in to sit down and seek advice from you. But there are skills that a person can learn that helps them in that one-on-one format be able to teach in a way that's probably very different than the skills that you would use in a large format class.
Yeah, I remember President Howard W. Hunter said that the very best teaching is one-on-one.
Yeah.
And often takes place outside the classroom.
Yeah, and if we're trying to teach in the Savior's way, one of the things you'll notice in the scriptures is that he does both kinds of teaching. He'll teach the Sermon on the Mount, where he's with a large audience and he's sharing his update on the law, his fulfillment of the law. And then someone like Nicodemus comes to him and they have a one-on-one conversation, or the woman of Samaria at the well. Each teaching is incredibly vital, and each one can be the place where a person is touched by the Spirit and really changed. And it's good for teachers to be able to develop skills on both levels. I'm one of those weird people, John, that is probably more comfortable in front of 200 people than I am with one. I remember going on a mission and being terrified that I was going to spend all day with one person. But that was a skill set that I had to develop. And now when a student comes into my office or I'm alone with one of my children, I realize, oh, I'm still a teacher here. And as a teacher, there still are techniques and skills that will help me in this situation to have the largest impact that I can have, to do the best I can to help them. And we're not only talking about what to do in those situations, but why it's important that you create those situations as well. That even if you do what I do at BYU, which is teach a class that averages about 250 people, I would still say the most important moments of the semester usually come in one-on-one settings and not in the large group format.
Well, Casey, this whole Why Religion Presents series you've created is a gift. And I know this has taken you literally hundreds of hours. So thank you.
Well, I've just got to say, it's been a gift to me too. After every interview was done, and I've spent a lot of time editing and cutting and putting them together, I've sat down and said, I want everybody to have 45 minutes with Brad Wilcox or with Tyler Griffin or with Jan Martin to talk about their craft. And I hope it was also useful for the teachers that we are involved too, because they're in the thick of things so much. And the way things work at BYU is we are running from place to place, and we don't often get the chance to sit down and talk about things in a format where we are discussing our craft, where we're trying to figure out how to be better and do better as gospel teachers.
So the first episode with Elder Gilbert and Chad Webb will come out 1 week from today. And then once a week throughout the summer, there'll be another episode. We really hope that you will participate. There's a lot of people who are not aware of the Why Religion podcast. And if you are interested in teaching, or if you know someone who is interested in teaching, please share this series with them. This is going to be fantastic in service.
We hope that, if your spouse just got called as the gospel doctrine teacher, or you did, you take a little bit of time and listen to these episodes on your own time and at your own pace and sharpen your skills. And we also would hope that if you are a professional teacher who does this every single day and is really good at what you do, you're still going to want to have the opportunity to sit down and listen to these really gifted teachers explain their craft so that you can incorporate some of what they do into what you do.
And as we know, the very most important teaching takes place in the home. So if you're teaching one child or a second child or a grandchild, this series is for you as well. So please share it with others. Now, Casey, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you want listeners to know about this series that we haven't talked about?
Maybe I can talk a little bit about its origins, and I want to just mention some people that were very meaningful to me. John, you and I are professional teachers, and we both started out in the seminary and institute system, which is as great a job as there can be in my mind. I loved it so much, and I still love it, and I still think of myself as a seminary teacher. I started out at a seminary in Salt Lake Valley, and one of the unique things was I bumbled into a carpool where there were 6 other teachers and I who would take turns driving. And that was great because I was young and poor and we only had one car and I only had to drive once a week. But what really made it wonderful was that in that carpool on the way up to the seminary, we were all talking about our lessons and we were all talking about what had happened the day before and what worked and what didn't work. And we were turning into this little learning community that was helping and sharpening each other's lessons. And there were days when in that little carpool, I heard something from one of the other teachers that saved my lesson that day and helped me connect with the students in a way that brought the gospel to their hearts and their minds. As time went on and I progressed, the carpool split up and went in its different directions. And we're all still close. We're all still in touch. At the same time, too, my assignment here at BYU is just as wonderful, but maybe a little bit more lonely. I don't have as many opportunities to sit down and spend what was practically an hour a day talking about teaching and what I'm doing. And I also am in a complex environment where you're teaching a totally different subject than me, and I'm teaching something different than the person in the office next to me. This podcast really was an attempt to recapture that feel of what would it look like if you got to sit in a car and drive somewhere for a half hour with Tony Sweat or with Barbara Gardner or with Emily Freeman, and you got a chance to talk to them about how they teach and what they do. And we're hoping that you'll just kind of see yourself that way, that you're in a conversation with some really, really gifted teachers who are explaining how they do what they do and what the gift is that they have that they can impart. We talk about spiritual gifts in the church, and I really do believe that teaching is a spiritual gift. And the Lord urges us in section 46 in Moroni 10 in a number of places to seek out spiritual gifts and find the ones that can help us to help other people. Because everyone in the church is a teacher. I hope that everybody is concerned about teaching and the most effective things that they can do to help people learn the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's like you mentioned, we've all had a teacher that had a huge impact in our life, and maybe for really different reasons. And everybody has had a mother, a father, a family member that took the time to teach them the principles of the gospel and that made a huge difference in their lives. If we can sharpen those skills, if we can learn the art of teaching and how to hone the skills that come with teaching, we can make a huge difference and make the church a more welcoming, inviting, and powerful place where we learn truths that help us draw closer to God and Jesus Christ.
Well, that takes us to our last question, which I was already planning to ask you, but now you've led right into it, Casey, which is, can you share a personal experience from your life of how a teacher has helped you connect with Jesus Christ?
One thing that comes to mind is when I was training to be a seminary teacher, I was very young, very idealistic. I was pretty fiery too, and I would go into the classroom and make some of those definitive declarations that maybe I wouldn't make today. Not that I'm less certain about my testimony of the gospel. It's just I'm a little bit more sensitive to situations. And I had one student that I just could not handle. He was difficult. He was a really, really difficult kid. And he was unpleasant, and he was sort of rude to me and rude to the students. And one day a thing happened at the seminary that was so sort of upsetting that I took the kid out and took him to the principal's office. And I basically explained to the principal that I felt like his behavior warranted him being removed from the seminary. I was that upset. And a few minutes later, the kid came back to my classroom, and he was there. And the principal, my very first seminary principal, had not evicted him from the seminary like I had demanded. And I was upset about this. So I went down and talked to the principal and said, I asked you if you would remove him. And the teacher said this, hey, I know that you struggle with this kid. I know that you're not getting along with him. And I was like, I don't even like the kid, and I'm supposed to love the people that I teach. The teacher set me down, and in this one-on-one format, he said, I know that you don't like him, but can you accept that the Savior loved him enough to die for him? And can you teach him on those terms? And that changed the way that I looked at him and looked at everybody, to where today, no matter how difficult a student is, I look at them and say, this is someone that the Savior died for. And if the Savior loves and cares about them that much, if I'm not there, can I at least love them on that level and try and help them in that way? That's allowed me to deal with some challenging personalities, I hope in a loving and accepting kind of way. And even that kid and I eventually did cross a few barriers. I learned a little bit more about his story and where he was coming from. And I came to understand him better and hopefully became a better teacher. Because if we're trying to pin down exactly what Jesus Christ was, he's a Jewish carpenter. He's a rabbi from the 1st century AD. The title that he most preferred to be known by, I think, is teacher. In fact, I remember that touching moment in the Gospel of John, where after he's resurrected and he introduces himself to Mary, the first title she uses is Rabboni, which is teacher. That's how she thought of him too, and that was an important part of their relationship. If we want to be like the Savior, we're going to learn how to teach, and we're going to learn that teaching really is loving a person and helping them understand and find what their potential is.
Thanks for listening to Why Religion. This podcast is a production of religious education at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. My name is John Hilton, the host and producer. The Why Religion podcast team also includes from BYU Religious Education, Professors Jenna Erickson, Casey Griffiths, Jared Halverson, Travis Searle, Ryan Sharp, Hank Smith, and Brad Wilcox. Promotional materials were created and distributed by Leanne Kopis and Katie King. Recording, mixing, and original music was done by BYU students Alec Galloway and Ethan Arkell. Original music and scoring for the Why Religion podcast was also created by the fabulous BYU student musicians Grant Cagle,
Sam Clausen,
Colette Jones,
Alistair Scheuermann.
If you enjoy what you've heard, please like and subscribe to Why Religion and leave us a rating. This really helps others discover the podcast. And join us next time as we continue to bring the everyday Latter-day Saint fascinating gospel studies done by BYU religion professors to enlighten your mind and strengthen your faith in Jesus Christ.